I remember the day I realized everything I thought I knew about my marriage was a lie. It was a clear autumn afternoon, and our kitchen window was open, letting in a cool breeze that rustled the curtains. I was slicing apples for a pie, my 7-year-old daughter Ava drawing pictures of princesses at the table, and my husband of 12 years was at the office, or so he claimed. We had always had our challenges, our disagreements, but we had a life, a home, a child, and I'd trusted in the strength of that foundation. I didn't see the cracks forming right under my nose, yet something that day tugged at me to check our shared email account. I almost never did. Jared handled most of our bills and finances. I usually left it to him, but an odd impulse made me open my laptop while the apples browned on the stovetop. That's when I found it. A confirmation email from a real estate agency. The subject line read, "Closing documents for 48 Sycamore Avenue." I blinked, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Our address was not on Sycamore. We had never talked about buying any other property. So what was this? At first I thought it was spam or some phishing scam. But when I read the email more closely, I saw references to a down payment, closing costs, and Jared's name neatly typed at the bottom. My stomach twisted so hard it felt as though the ground had fallen out from under me. This was no scam. My husband had purchased another house. Every fiber in my body froze in that moment. I could hear Ava humming to herself, completely oblivious to the storm brewing a few feet away. For her sake, I tried to keep my voice steady, my face neutral, but inside, everything was unraveling. If Jared had bought a house, how had he hidden it? For what possible reason would he need a second property? For the rest of that afternoon, I functioned on autopilot, helping Ava with her homework, preparing dinner, listening to my mother's phone call about upcoming holiday plans. My mind spun incessantly. He bought a house. How much money did he spend? With whose money? I forced a smile when Jared finally walked in, giving Ava a hug, telling me he was exhausted from meetings. I nodded like I believed him, while my blood ran cold. After Ava went to bed, I quietly confronted him in the living room. "Jared," I said in a voice I fought to keep calm, "I saw an email about a property on Sycamore Avenue." He froze, his eyes flicking from me to the hallway where Ava slept and back again. He tried to laugh it off. "Oh, it's just a little investment. My buddy was telling me the real estate market's hot, and I thought." I never agreed to invest in property. My voice shook despite my effort. "You spent thousands of dollars, maybe more, without even discussing it with me?" He quickly tried to spin it as a surprise investment. "I wanted to do something to secure Ava's future," he said. "I was going to tell you once it was finalized." I stared at him, reading the panic behind his eyes. He was lying. I'd known him too long to mistake that trembling edge in his voice for sincerity. "Tell me the truth," I whispered. He swallowed hard. For a moment I thought he might. But then he just shrugged, turned away, and said, "You wouldn't understand. It's complicated." I should have insisted. I should have pressed him right then. But I worried about waking Ava, about our voices rising. I let it drop for the night, my heart pounding, tears in my eyes, as I lay awake wondering what sort of secret life my husband had started living. The next day, while Jared was at work, I did my own investigating. My mind was already tortured by worst-case scenarios. Maybe he had a gambling problem and needed a house to hide something. Maybe he was planning to flip it behind my back. But the possibility of another woman felt too cliché, too dramatic, something that happened in soap operas, not in real life. I found the phone number for the real estate agent mentioned in the email. Pretending to be Jared's assistant, I asked for an update on the property. The agent cheerfully confirmed that the closing went beautifully last week, and the owners had moved out. Jared could pick up the keys anytime. When I hung up, I felt sick. "He already closed on the house," I mumbled to myself, "so it's definitely his." Numbly, I clicked around on public records sites until I found the property listing. A modest white colonial home with a wraparound porch, not too big, not too small. The previous owners had posted pictures: hardwood floors, newly remodeled kitchen, a small backyard with a neglected rose garden. It was oddly charming, the sort of place I might have loved if it hadn't been connected to this betrayal. That evening, Jared came home later than usual, claiming an unexpected dinner with a client. Once again, I played along. My suspicion had grown too large to ignore, yet I also sensed that confronting him directly wouldn't yield answers. He'd just lie again. Instead, I intended to gather enough evidence so he could no longer deny the truth. Days turned to weeks as I quietly scoured his phone bills, credit card statements, and email logs, the ones he hadn't yet deleted. The puzzle pieces formed a picture that made my blood run cold. There was a name that popped up repeatedly: Melissa Daniels. Late-night texts, calls that lasted an hour or more while he was supposedly at the gym. Even a line item for a spa weekend in a city 2 hours away. I found her social media profile. She was younger, bright-eyed, with a wide smile and dyed red hair. Her posts were full of quotes about following your heart and never settling, interspersed with pictures of cocktails and fancy brunches. It didn't take me long to see that she was wearing a diamond bracelet in one photo, the same one Jared had told me he'd won at a holiday raffle, and gave me a fraction of that story about returning it because it was too big. He never showed me the piece, and I was so busy with Ava, I'd never questioned it. In a single week of covert snooping, I discovered that Jared was funneling money from our joint savings accounts, plus a line of credit he'd opened in his name alone, into paying for this second house. He had established automatic withdrawals to cover monthly mortgage payments. This was no investment. It was a love nest. My hands literally shook as I sat at my computer taking screenshots, saving evidence to a hidden folder. It felt surreal. The man I'd believed I'd grow old with had orchestrated an elaborate betrayal, all while chatting casually with me each night about dog food brands or what to pack for Ava's lunch. The heartbreak was like a knife inside my chest. I kept thinking of Ava. She adored her father. He was never short on laughter or playtime when it came to her. How could I rip our family apart? Yet, how could I continue in this sham of a marriage? One afternoon, I found a message from Melissa on Jared's phone. It popped up while he was in the shower, and his phone was on the kitchen counter. "When can we move in?" she asked. Then a few heart emojis and a photo of a half-packed cardboard box. My breath caught in my throat. She was planning to move into that house. Our money was paying for it, yet she'd live there with my husband. The betrayal was a poison flooding my bloodstream. In the swirl of heartbreak and rage, I felt alone. I needed an ally, someone I could trust. My mother was sweet but prone to panic, and I didn't want Ava overhearing a meltdown. My best friend lived in another state, so I confided in my older sister, Becky. Over coffee at a quiet cafe, I laid out everything: the house, the mistress, the mounting evidence. Her face hardened with fury. "He's cheating and using your joint finances to pay for it," she hissed. "You can't let him get away with that." "I don't know what to do," I admitted, tears burning in my eyes. "I feel like I'm stuck, like no matter what I choose, Ava's going to lose her dad in some way." Becky put a hand on mine. "You do what's right for you and for her future. He's the one who made the choice to break your marriage, not you." When I admitted I felt powerless, she gave me a sharp look. "You're not powerless. If he secretly bought the house, you can legally argue marital assets. You could also, move in first." She said it half-jokingly, but the moment those words left her lips, something sparked in me. A bold, wild idea. "Move in first," I repeated, leaning forward. My heart raced at the very concept. "Is that even possible?" She shrugged. "Why not? If you have access to the keys, or you can get them, it might be an interesting statement. Let his mistress find out the wife is already there." A small, dangerous flame flickered in my chest. Could I do it? Could I stake a claim on that property, legally or otherwise, before Jared and Melissa made it their love nest? Because from what I'd learned online, as long as the house was acquired during the marriage, and not designated as a separate property in a prenuptial agreement, which we never had, it belonged to both of us, even if he bought it in his name. I needed information, a real estate lawyer, a sense of my rights. Over the next few days, while Jared was out of the house, ostensibly working late, I met with a discreet attorney who confirmed my suspicion. Any property purchased during the marriage with marital funds was subject to equitable distribution. If Jared had used funds that came from our joint or shared accounts, even partially, it meant I had a rightful claim to that home. Moreover, if I wanted to move in, there wasn't much stopping me, as long as I had a copy of the key and no court order told me otherwise. The lawyer actually smirked when I told him my plan. "It's unconventional," he said, "but not illegal. Just be aware, this is going to escalate things. If you're okay with that, it's your prerogative." My heart pounded. Escalation was an understatement, but I was tired of passively letting Jared walk all over me. If he wanted to humiliate me, burn our marriage vows, and put me in a corner, then maybe I needed to stand up and set a line he wouldn't forget. I started my stealth operation by tailing Jared after he left for one of his late nights. I'd become a person I barely recognized, driving my car a safe distance behind his, my hands shaking on the wheel, adrenaline coursing. Sure enough, he drove directly to 48 Sycamore, parked out front, hopped out, and let himself in with a key. My stomach twisted. He was definitely using the place, probably setting it up for Melissa. It was obvious that he had the only set of keys, but real estate offices keep spares, especially if the house was recently sold. The next day, after dropping Ava at school, I walked into the real estate office that had handled the sale. I claimed to be Jared's wife, truth, who needed the spares, half-truth. The front desk receptionist gave me a suspicious look, but I presented identification matching Jared's last name, along with a fabricated story about how my husband lost his keys on a business trip, and he's in a panic. The receptionist frowned, but eventually rummaged through a metal box behind her desk. After calling the agent, who apparently didn't answer, she returned with a ring of keys labeled 48 Sycamore Spare. I nearly choked on relief. "Thank you," I murmured, trying not to look as though I'd just stolen the crown jewels. "He'll be so grateful." She gave me a wry smile. "Just have him call us to confirm, all right?" I nodded and hurried out before anyone could question me further. With the keys in my purse, I felt power surge through my veins. On my way home, I stopped at a hardware store. I purchased brand new locks, plus a do-it-yourself installation kit. If I was going to do this, I was going all in. That evening, Jared texted me that he'd be working late. Of course. Liar. Instead of waiting at home, I dropped Ava at Becky's. I told her we'd have a sleepover with her cousins, and she was delighted. Meanwhile, I drove to Sycamore Avenue, parked a block away, and walked slowly down the sidewalk. My heart felt ready to burst as I approached that modest white colonial under the glow of a street lamp. The porch light was on. He was inside. I peered through a side window, my breath fogging the glass. In the faint light of the living room, I saw an open suitcase, random decor items stacked along the walls, pictures, lamps, boxes labeled with a flourish of pink marker, kitchen. So Melissa's things were already there. The emotion that flared within me was pure fury, followed by a pang of heartbreak. He'd planned for a life with her. I forced myself not to cry, to remain focused on the plan. I backed away from the house, returning to my car. Reeling with adrenaline, I waited for 2 hours until Jared finally stepped out. He locked the door behind him, got in his car, and drove off. I waited an extra 10 minutes to be sure he wouldn't return. Then I snuck back, used my newly acquired key, and stepped inside. The house felt cold, partly because no one was truly living there yet, partly because my entire body was shaking with nerves. I flicked on the hallway light. The space was empty, except for the scattered boxes and a cheap couch that looked brand new, like they'd just bought it together for their new love nest. Anger boiled up. He used our money. My money. I inhaled deeply, scanning the walls for alarm systems. None. Good. I stood there a long minute, letting the reality settle in. The floors were beautiful, a lovely oak. The walls had been freshly painted. A wave of bittersweet emotion washed over me. This might have been a home for us, for our family, if Jared had wanted us. Instead, he'd used it to orchestrate a betrayal. Summoning my resolve, I grabbed the hardware kit from my bag. In near silence, I installed brand new locks on the front and back doors. I changed them methodically, checking and rechecking. Certain Jared's keys would no longer work. Then, by the glow of a single floor lamp, I assembled a small cot I'd bought, plus some bedding. This was my house now, too, whether he liked it or not. I paced, debating whether to rummage through Melissa's boxes, but decided not to. That would only stoke my rage. Instead, I unrolled a sleeping bag, set an alarm on my phone, and forced myself to rest. As I dozed off, the house was eerily quiet, yet my mind buzzed with the gravity of what I was doing. Would Jared show up in the morning, furious, demanding answers? Would Melissa? A thrill of fear mingled with triumph. Let them come. I'll be here. I awoke at dawn to faint sunlight through the window. My body ached from sleeping on a makeshift cot. I quickly changed into fresh clothes from a small duffel bag. Then I made coffee. Yes, I'd actually brought instant coffee packets along with a travel kettle. The house had no groceries, but the water was turned on and the electricity seemed to work fine. I sipped the lukewarm coffee, staring around at the boxes. A wave of surreal realization. I am squatting in the house my husband bought for his mistress. Around 7:30 a.m., I heard a car pull up. My heartbeat accelerated. I braced myself, stepping into the hallway, adrenaline flooding my veins. The doorknob jostled, as though someone was trying a key. Then I heard Jared's low curse. Another couple of tries, then he pounded on the door. "What the?" he muttered, his voice muffled. I stayed still, letting him struggle. "Who changed the lock?" he growled. A moment later, the doorbell rang, incessant. "Hello?" he called. "Is someone in there?" He couldn't see me from the tiny frosted glass window. I walked forward and calmly opened the door. The moment he saw me, his jaw dropped. "Elena," he breathed, shock contorting his features. "What are you doing here?" I folded my arms. "I could ask you the same question, Jared." He gaped like a fish. His hair was disheveled, eyes bloodshot as though he'd barely slept. "How did you? What's going on?" He tried to enter, but I barred him with my arm. "You changed the locks?" "Yes," I said quietly. "I have every right, since this house is property acquired during our marriage, using joint funds. Correct?" He stepped back, blinking in confusion. "What are you talking about?" I pushed the door open and gestured for him to come inside. He looked around with wild eyes, seeing my cot, my bag, my coffee mug. "You can't just move in," he stammered. "This is my property. I bought it." "And you bought it while we were married, with money from our shared accounts." I gave him a tight smile. "That means it's ours, Jared, whether you like it or not." He looked ready to burst. No, this can't be real. This is insane." "You know what's insane?" I countered, my voice rising. "Buying a house for your mistress and thinking your wife would never find out." He flinched, his cheeks coloring. For a heartbeat, he looked as if he might deny everything. But then his shoulders slumped. This isn't," he rubbed his face. "Look, I can explain." "I'm listening," I said, crossing my arms. "Okay, it was stupid," he said, raking his hair with trembling fingers. "But Melissa and I was going to end things with you anyway, eventually. We just needed a place to live. I didn't mean to blindside you like this. It's complicated." My stomach churned. "Complicated," I repeated. "Yes, you said that before. Except you didn't plan on telling me anything until it was too late, did you? Did you plan to serve me divorce papers out of the blue? Let me figure it out on my own that you had a new house, a new woman, and you used our money, Jared. Our daughter's future." He had the nerve to look annoyed. "I was going to pay it all back eventually. Melissa and I..." "Enough." My voice cracked like a whip. "I'm done listening to your excuses. I know about the credit cards, the withdrawals, the spa weekends. I know about everything. So if you're here to guilt me into leaving, you can forget it." He inhaled sharply, fists clenching at his sides. "You can't do this. Melissa is moving in next week." I arched an eyebrow. "She might want to reconsider that because I'm not leaving." At that, he let out a strangled laugh. "What the hell, Elena? You want to live here? Why?" I didn't bother to hide the venom in my voice. "Because you lied, betrayed our marriage, and tried to set up your mistress in a house funded by my labor, my sacrifices, my time raising our child. I may not be able to stop you from having an affair, but I can sure as hell stop you from enjoying this cozy love nest." He glared at me, a flush creeping up his neck. "Fine," he spat. "You know what? Keep it. You'll have to pay the mortgage. I'm not covering it anymore." My lips curled into a bitter smile. "We'll see about that. Because until a court says otherwise, your name is on the mortgage and we're both responsible for the bills. Remember that next time you try to walk away from your obligations." He looked ready to say something cruel, but then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, pressed his lips together, and let out a heavy sigh. "I'm going to be late for work," he muttered. "This isn't over, Elena. I'll handle this." And with that, he stormed out, leaving me trembling in the doorway, adrenaline still pumping through my veins. The moment I heard his car drive off, my bravado crumbled, and tears stung my eyes. This was war. and I had to be ready for the fallout. One of the hardest parts came a few days later. We hadn't told Ava anything yet, but Jared and I weren't speaking at home. He spent most of his time at the house on Sycamore or with Melissa. I was still living at our original home with Ava, but I also spent some nights at the new house, determined to hold my ground there. Becky helped watch Ava on those nights. The tension was suffocating. Finally, Ava asked me in her gentle little voice, "Mommy, why is Daddy never home anymore?" She looked at me with big, worried eyes, and my heart broke. I gently explained that Daddy had a new job project that kept him busy, but soon we'd talk more about changes in our family. She was too smart to be placated for long. I worried that if I didn't speak up, Jared might feed her a twisted version of the truth. So that weekend, I sat Ava down on the couch. "Sweetheart," I began, my throat tight, "your dad and I are having some problems right now." She stared at me, clutching her stuffed dinosaur. "Does that mean you're getting divorced?" The directness knocked the wind out of me. "I don't know yet," I admitted, tears gathering in my eyes. "But Daddy's made some choices that hurt me. So I'm trying to figure out what's best for us, for you." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she whispered, "I don't want you and Daddy to fight. I love you both." I pulled her close, my tears falling. "We love you too, Ava. That will never change." That night, she cried herself to sleep in my arms. I thought of how many nights were yet to come, how many tears might still be shed. Jared had shattered more than just our marital trust. He'd shaken the very foundation of our family. Meanwhile, Jared escalated his efforts to force me out of the Sycamore house. He left angry voicemails demanding I hand over my keys, threatening to call the police or have me evicted. I calmly reminded him each time that the property was marital. "You can call the police," I said in one heated phone call. "We'll see what they have to say about your wife occupying a house you purchased with her money. I doubt that will go over well in court." He cursed, hung up, and next thing I knew I received a text from him. "We need to talk in person. Tomorrow, 6 p.m. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I waited in the Sycamore living room, arms folded. He arrived, keys jangling uselessly at the front door. I let him in. "Nice to see you knocking for a change," I remarked icily. He let out a frustrated breath. "This is ridiculous. Melissa is coming next week with the moving truck. She's already left her old apartment. You can't stay here. It makes no sense." I stared at him, seething. "You want me to be the one who's homeless while you shack up here with her? How does that make sense?" He paced, rubbing his temples. "I'm not trying to make you homeless. You can keep our old house for now, but this belongs to me." I couldn't believe his arrogance. "You just can't stand the fact that I'm asserting my rights. Jared, you made a mistake. You could have had everything if you'd just been honest. But now, I'm staying. If Melissa shows up, I'll tell her exactly how you paid for this place." He flushed. "Don't bring her into this." "She's already into this, Jared. She's the reason we're here." He looked at me, his expression a mixture of resentment and guilt. Then, in a quieter voice, he said, "You're hurting yourself by doing this. It's not going to change anything. I'm with Melissa now. We're over." His words struck me like a slap. I swallowed hard. "Maybe I can't change your heart," I whispered, voice trembling, "but you won't destroy me. You won't leave me with nothing." He shook his head, then turned and walked out without another word. I watched his car disappear down the street. My legs gave out, and I sank onto the brand new couch they'd picked out together, feeling the weight of heartbreak and betrayal pressing down on me. The real showdown came on a sunny Saturday. Melissa arrived in a U-Haul, exactly as Jared had warned, accompanied by a girlfriend. I was in the living room, sipping iced tea, scanning through some legal documents my attorney had sent over. Suddenly, through the window, I saw a moving truck backing into the driveway. My heart pounded. "It's happening." I stood, squared my shoulders, and opened the front door as Melissa hopped out of the truck. She looked younger in person than in her photos, maybe mid-20s. She wore tight jeans, a cropped top, and a determined expression as she marched up to the porch. She had the posture of someone who believed this was her new domain. Her friend trailed behind, holding a box labeled Melissa's Clothes. They both paused when they saw me in the doorway, arms crossed. Hi," Melissa began, scanning me with open confusion. "I'm sorry, are you the caretaker?" I almost laughed. "No, I'm Elena, Jared's wife." Her face went ashen. Her friend's eyes went wide. A heavy silence settled around us. The only sound was a bird chirping in a nearby tree, the faint hiss of the truck's engine. "Wife?" Melissa echoed, voice trembling. I gave her a tight smile. "Yes, wife. As in, still legally married. The wife he didn't bother to mention while he was buying this little love nest behind my back." She glanced at the friend, who seemed just as shocked. Then Melissa tried to recover, jutted her chin out, and said, "Well, he told me you two were separated, that it was just a matter of finalizing the paperwork." I let out a harsh laugh. "Separated? News to me. He's been living under my roof, fathering my daughter, and lying to us both." Her cheeks reddened. Whether it was anger or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. "But you might want to know that the money he used to buy this house wasn't all his. It came from our joint account, my money, my labor. Which means, legally, I have just as much right to be here as he does." She stared, speechless. I added, "You might not want to unload your boxes just yet, unless you like living with your boyfriend's wife." A flush crept over Melissa's face. He never said." She paused, then shook her head. "He told me he paid for this by himself, that you two were done, he was just tying up loose ends." Her friend hovered awkwardly in the background, boxes still in her arms. I shrugged. "Then he lied to you, just like he lied to me. If you want to try living here, by all means, I won't physically stop you. But I promise, this is about to become a legal nightmare for Jared. And do you really want to set up shop in a house that's half owned by the wife?" Melissa's friend set the box down. "Mel, we can't." She looked at me, then at Melissa. "Let's call Jared." Melissa fumbled for her phone, but before she could dial, Jared's car screeched to a halt at the curb. He rushed out, panic etched on his face. "Stop!" he shouted, jogging up the walkway. "What are you doing, Alina? This is insane." I folded my arms again, a gesture that was becoming second nature. "I'm protecting my rights. Hello to you too, Jared." He looked between me and Melissa, who was glaring at him. "You said your wife was out of the picture," she hissed. "You never told me she had any claim on this house." He groaned, raking his hands through his hair. "I told you we were separated. It's complicated." "Ah, the magic word again," I drawled. "Complicated. That's what you said to me too." Melissa threw up her hands, turning to Jared. "You used her money to buy this place? Are you kidding me? You told me it was your money, from your bonus." At that, I raised my eyebrows. "Bonus?" Jared got a bonus so large that it covered a down payment on a house in a nice neighborhood, plus the mortgage payments to date. That's a neat trick, considering I've seen his pay stubs. He might have gotten a small bonus, but it sure as hell wasn't enough for all of this. Jared was cornered, glancing from me to Melissa, both of us furious. His friend stood there like she'd walked into the wrong movie. "Let's just calm down," Jared muttered, trying to take Melissa's hand. She pulled away. "Calm down? You said we'd start our life here," she snapped. "But you never mentioned your wife would be living here too, because apparently it's half hers." I turned to walk inside, letting the door hang open so they could follow if they wanted. The living room was painfully bare, with boxes and a couch. Jared followed, half stumbling, while Melissa hovered near the threshold. "Look," Jared began, directing his words mostly at her. "I can fix this. We'll refinance, get Elena off the deed." "Off the deed?" I echoed, outraged. "That's interesting, considering you never put me on the deed. It's titled under your name alone, but the courts won't care whose name is on the deed if it's proven you used marital funds." He made a strangled sound of frustration. "Then we'll pay her back her share. Right, Melissa? We'll figure it out." He looked at me. "Would that satisfy you? A check for your half of the down payment or whatever? Then you're out." I stared at him, my heart pounding. "I don't want your hush money. I want accountability." Then I turned to Melissa. "If you still want to move in, be my guest. Just know I'll be coming and going as I please, and I might not be so hospitable when you're trying to play house with my husband." She swallowed, looking uncertain, her bravado slipping away. "Jared, this is not what you promised me." He looked desperate. "We'll talk in private, okay? We can figure out a way to handle the finances. Elena is just pulling a stunt." I scoffed. "A stunt? If taking what's rightfully mine is a stunt, then yes, guilty as charged." Melissa shook her head, stepping back. "I can't deal with this. You lied to me." She turned on her heel, motioning to her friend. "Load the boxes back up. I'm not staying here. Her friend sighed in relief, carrying the box back to the truck. Jared looked panicked. Wait, Melissa? He followed her out, but she brushed him off. They argued in hushed tones at the end of the driveway. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction. So this is how their perfect dream begins, an argument on the front lawn. Eventually, she climbed back into the driver's seat of the U-Haul, revved the engine, and took off. Jared lingered by his car, staring after her with a helpless expression. Then he turned, locked eyes with me, and I saw pure hatred. For a second, that hatred hurt. But I reminded myself he was the one who had done all of this. I simply responded. After a charged moment, he got into his car and sped away. I sank onto the couch, heart pounding. My phone buzzed, a text from Becky. You okay? I typed back, yes, she's gone. For now. Days passed. Jared didn't come to Sycamore again as far as I knew. He avoided me at home, sleeping on the couch or not coming back until he was sure Ava and I were asleep. Meanwhile, I scheduled an appointment with my lawyer to file for divorce. My sadness was a living, breathing thing in my chest, but so was my determination. I refused to be a victim any longer. When Jared received the papers, I expected an outburst. Instead, he seemed eerily calm. I'd left them on the dining table with a note. You can sign amicably or fight me in court. But I'm done. When I got home from picking Ava up at dance class, the papers were gone. Jared was gone too. He texted me later, I'll be in touch about visitation with Ava. But you'll regret going nuclear. I rolled my eyes at the hypocrisy. You're the one who bought a secret house, Jared. Remember that. I didn't send the text, though. I wanted to keep communications civil for Ava's sake. She was the only reason I even responded to him at all. Part of me wondered if the house fiasco might be resolved quickly. Maybe Jared would sign it over to me, or we'd sell it. But that was naive. Our lawyers got involved, and his side tried to paint me as a vindictive wife. They claimed the house was purely in Jared's name, that no marital assets were used. My lawyer, however, presented pages of bank statements showing transfers from our joint checking to Jared's personal account around the exact dates he made the down payment. We also had the details from credit card transactions that he used to cover fees. I had screenshots of text messages from Jared bragging to a friend about siphoning money so Elena won't notice. The moment those came out, his lawyer's tone changed, and they began to backpedal. The judge, upon reviewing the early evidence, strongly suggested that Jared would have an uphill battle. Meanwhile, I was still living part-time at Sycamore, mostly out of principle, and partly for my own emotional separation from Jared. I told Ava only that Mommy had to spend some nights away working on adult matters. She didn't like it, but I tried to keep routines stable for her at our old home. Becky helped a lot, stepping in to babysit, to keep Ava's life feeling somewhat normal. Melissa was nowhere to be seen. A mutual acquaintance told me she'd moved back to her parents' house after discovering that Jared was still entangled in a messy divorce, that he'd lied about finances, and that the house was co-owned. The same acquaintance said Melissa posted some cryptic rants on social media about deceitful men and too many secrets. I felt a grim satisfaction. Not that I wanted to ruin her life, but if you plan to set up house with a married man, you can't expect a fairy tale ending. Ava sensed the tension growing heavier each day. Jared had started picking her up from school occasionally, taking her out for ice cream or to the park. He tried to act like everything was normal, as if he wasn't living a double life. Ava was confused, but she was also resilient. She told me, Daddy and I talked about how grown-ups sometimes disagree. He said you'll figure it out. That night, I sobbed alone at Sycamore. My heart ached, not just for me, but for Ava. I realized that no matter how justified my revenge, it wouldn't erase the pain my daughter felt. The next morning, I scheduled an appointment with a child psychologist for her. I wanted her to have a safe space to process everything. This divorce was going to happen, and it would be messy, but we needed to shield Ava as much as possible. I also began quietly preparing to make Sycamore a place that truly felt like my own. If Jared was going to fight me on it, so be it. But with the evidence stacked in my favor, it was likely I'd end up with the property or a fair settlement. Might as well treat it like it's mine. So I started painting the upstairs bedroom a soft lavender, rearranging furniture, putting up some inexpensive decorations. Each brushstroke felt like reclaiming a piece of the life Jared had tried to steal from me. Within a month, we had our first formal hearing. The tension in the courtroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jared sat with his lawyer, constantly tapping his foot, scowling in my direction. My lawyer presented the case that Jared had used marital assets to purchase the Sycamore house without my consent or knowledge, thereby making the property part of the marital estate. Jared's lawyer tried to claim the funds were purely from his bonus, an inheritance from a distant relative, and personal lines of credit. But the paper trail told a different story. The judge's expression as he examined the documents was telling. He looked unimpressed by Jared's excuses. "Mr. Maddox," he said in a dry tone, "it appears that your personal lines of credit were being paid off from a joint account used for family expenses. That means your spouse effectively contributed to the funds you used to purchase this house." Jared's lawyer spluttered about lack of direct deposit records, but the judge shrugged. "You'll have a chance to make your case in the next session, but for now, I'm inclined to see the Sycamore property as marital. Ms. Maddox, you're not restricted from living there, as far as the court is concerned." I nearly sagged with relief. Jared's expression was thunderous. After that hearing, out in the hallway, Jared pulled me aside. "You want to humiliate me, right?" he spat. "Is that it?" I stared him down. "You humiliated yourself the day you decided to cheat and lie. I'm just making sure I'm not left in the dust." His lips thinned. "Fine, keep the damned house. I don't even want it anymore. Just name your price so I can get out of this fiasco." My chest hurt with the weight of heartbreak. This was the same man I'd once considered my soulmate. Now we were talking about property as though all those years of love and laughter never existed. I wanted to lash out, but instead, I simply said, "We'll handle it in mediation." He gave me a bitter glare. "You'll regret this. No judge will let you keep it all, you know. Maybe you'll get half, but I'll walk away with something." "Enjoy your half," I said softly. "Just remember, you can't share it with the mistress you bought it for. She's long gone." He flinched as if I'd slapped him. Then he turned and stalked away. Watching him go, I wondered if he felt even a speck of remorse, or if his pride was the only thing hurting. It was a question that would gnaw at me for a long time. Mediation sessions were grueling. We sat across from each other in a drab conference room, with a mediator trying to keep the peace. Jared swung between anger and false contrition. One moment he was snapping at me for blowing things out of proportion. The next he was claiming he wanted an amicable settlement for Ava's sake. I tried to remain polite, collecting the shards of my dignity as best I could. Finally, the mediator recommended a settlement. I would keep the Sycamore house, provided I refinanced it in my name within 6 months, removing Jared from the mortgage. I'd also keep the old house, but we'd sell that property and split the proceeds if I decided not to live in it. Jared would keep his car, his personal savings, what was left of it, and we'd establish a separate agreement for child support and visitation with Ava. The mistress was never mentioned in official documents, but everyone in that room knew the real reason we had gotten there. I insisted on a small chunk of spousal support for a limited time, given that I had sacrificed my career advancement to care for Ava while Jared's career soared. My lawyer made a compelling case, citing pay stubs and my underemployment. Ultimately, Jared grudgingly agreed. The mediator typed up a final draft, and we each had a chance to review it with our attorneys. As I read the draft, a whirlwind of emotions overwhelmed me. Sadness, relief, anger. This was the end of my marriage. Yet it was also the dawn of a new beginning. I realized that, ironically, I'd fallen in love with Sycamore. The place I once considered a vile symbol of Jared's infidelity had become a testament to my resilience. I wanted to remodel the backyard, plant a real rose garden, make it a home for me and Ava if that's where life took us. On a crisp morning 6 weeks later, Jared and I met one final time to sign the settlement papers. Our lawyers and the mediator were present. The entire process felt so businesslike, so devoid of the emotions I was brimming with. But that was the point. We were no longer a happy couple planning the future. We were exes dividing assets. He scrawled his signature with a heavy sigh. I signed my name, hands trembling. That was it. We were legally separated, soon to be fully divorced when the mandatory waiting period ended. Outside the office, Jared glanced at me. "Guess this is goodbye then," he said, stuffing his hands in his pockets. I looked at him, longing to see some flicker of the man I'd once loved. Instead, all I saw was a stranger, battered by his own mistakes. "Yeah," I whispered. His voice wavered. "I messed up. I know that, but can we keep it civil for Ava?" I nodded. "Yes, that's all I've ever wanted. For her to feel loved and secure. Don't make promises you can't keep with her." He shifted on his feet, not meeting my eyes. "Melissa's gone," he mumbled, "in case you were wondering." I pressed my lips together, unsure if I felt relief or indifference. "Good luck in whatever you do next," I offered, not meaning it wholeheartedly, but lacking the energy to be cruel. He turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone on the pavement. The final chapter of our marriage closed. After the separation, I officially moved into Sycamore full-time with Ava. My sister and I spent a weekend painting the walls in bright, welcoming colors. Friends came by to help me assemble used furniture I bought online: sturdy dressers, a new bed for Ava, a kitchen table. Slowly, we made it our home. The rose garden out back became my passion project. I spent hours pruning, planting new varieties, letting the fragrance fill the air as a daily reminder that something beautiful could grow from something so toxic. Ava struggled at first with the transition, missing the old house, missing her father's presence. He visited on weekends, sometimes picking her up for a day trip or an overnight at his small rental apartment. Over time, she adjusted, forging new memories with me in the Sycamore house. We baked cookies in the newly renovated kitchen, read books by the living room window, and sang songs on the porch swing I installed. One evening, we were in the backyard admiring the roses when Ava asked me, "Mommy, do you like living here better than our old house?" I paused, considering. "I liked our old house too," I said honestly. "That's where we had so many memories with Daddy. But this house is where we can start fresh. We can be safe and happy. It's ours." She nodded, hugging me around the waist. "I like it because you smile more now, even when it's just us." My eyes misted. "I love you, sweetheart, and that's never going to change no matter where we live." Months passed, and final divorce decrees were signed. Jared ended up leaving his job, apparently due to the scandal of misusing funds, though I didn't know the details. My lawyer informed me he'd been forced to pay restitution for some lines of credit he'd opened under false pretenses. He also had to pay the spousal support we agreed upon, though I suspected he struggled to keep up. A small, vindictive part of me felt a grim satisfaction. Another part felt only sorrow. If he had chosen honesty, we could have worked together to solve our problems. Now everything was in ashes. Melissa apparently moved out of state, or so the rumor went. I never heard from her again, nor did I care to. I sometimes wondered if she realized how close she came to stepping into a minefield, living in that house, financed by lies. At least she was free from Jared's manipulations. As for me, I found a new job at a local publishing company. Steadier hours, decent pay. My mother kept me on track with budgeting. Slowly, I refinanced Sycamore in my name, fulfilling the terms of our settlement. The satisfaction I felt signing those final papers, with me as the sole owner, was immense. I had turned a place that once symbolized betrayal into a haven for Ava and me. Standing in the yard at Sycamore, wearing gardening gloves, I pressed a new rose cutting into the soil. The morning sun warmed the back of my neck. Ava played a short distance away, chatting with her dolls. The house behind me glowed with fresh paint, the windows open to the spring air. If I listened closely, I could hear the faint hum of a world that had once been so chaotic, now at peace. Jared's presence in our lives had diminished. He took Ava every other weekend, tried to stay involved, but we no longer lived in daily conflict. He once texted me a half-hearted apology, saying he regretted how he handled things, that he'd started therapy, that he hoped one day we could be friends. I read it, felt a pang of complicated emotions, and responded with a neutral, polite acknowledgement. "I appreciate your regrets, but I'm focusing on the future now." I occasionally thought about how swiftly life can change. A year ago, I was a wife in a seemingly stable family, oblivious to the secrets that were about to blow it all apart. Now, I was a divorced single mother, rebuilding from the wreckage. But I was also stronger than I'd ever been, with a sense of self-worth that flared brighter each day. I discovered my capacity to fight back, to stand up for myself, to claim what was rightfully mine, even if it meant sleeping on a cot in a half-empty house for weeks. I glanced over at Ava. She caught my eye and waved, her smile lighting up her face. "Mommy, can I help with the roses?" "Of course, baby," I said, beckoning her over. We knelt side by side, pressing our hands into the soft earth. She giggled as she patted the soil over the roots. A gentle breeze stirred the air, carrying the delicate fragrance of new blossoms. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the peace wash over me. This was my home now. Our home. No more secrets, no more lies, just a future I would shape with my own hands. Occasionally, neighbors would walk by on the sidewalk, wave, and mention how lovely the house looked. They remembered the previous owners who had sold it to a young couple. I'd smile and say something like, "Actually, it's just me and my daughter now," feeling an unspoken pride in how far I'd come. There were moments I still felt a twinge of pain, seeing a family playing in their yard or hearing a father tell a silly joke to his kid. My heart would remember the illusions of our once happy marriage. But then I'd hear Ava laughing or see her face light up when she discovered a new bloom in the garden. And I'd remember. Jared might have tried to buy his happiness at my expense, but I refused to be the casualty of his betrayal. And so, day by day, I continued to flourish, as if each new petal in my rose garden was proof of resilience. The synergy of heartbreak and empowerment shaped me into a woman who understood her value. I had stared betrayal in the face and claimed my space anyway, quite literally. If Jared wanted to build a fantasy life with someone else, he was free to do so. But not with my money, not at my expense, and certainly not without consequences. Sometimes I'd sip coffee on my porch, looking down the street where once a moving truck had tried to park. I'd recall the image of Melissa stepping out, convinced she was about to start a new life in my place. That memory no longer made me angry. It made me appreciate what I'd done. I had refused to be replaced, ousted, or robbed. I'd stood my ground and made sure no one else got to decide my worth. In quiet gratitude, I'd watched the sunrise tinge the sky with gold. The silence of the morning, the stillness of the house that had become my sanctuary. Sometimes, I thought, if I can survive this, I can survive anything. The final, most important lesson was that I was stronger, braver, and more capable than I ever gave myself credit for. I wasn't just a wronged wife. I was a woman who claimed her life back, one day at a time, one rose at a time, and one triumphant breath at a time. No matter how painful, life would go on. Ava and I would thrive, and the house that Jared had secretly bought for his mistress became the house where I rediscovered my independence, my voice, and my power. And that, I realized, was a far better ending than the happily ever after I once imagined. Because it wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning, blooming as surely as the roses in my garden.